I have to pass the mic on to Carlos, who is going to do a demo. And Carlos, if you have any links that you want to paste on the channel chat, I can add them to the agenda.
Yeah, I can do that. Let me see. I have a repo here. So yeah, I only have 30 minutes. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me share my screen. So I'm going to do a demo, and this is basically a demo that I did, I think it was 2 weeks ago in the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit North America 2020. Long name. But I was given only 40 minutes. So I do some training and some education and some client engagement. And when it comes to Tecton and Knative, I see in our community Slack and also internal Slack of people asking about CI/CD or what should be the CI/CD pipeline for Knative. And I also see folks asking about Knative. So what I tried to do in that conference was consolidate kind of to the minimum demo possible that somebody can just install Knative and Tecton, and at the same time understand a little bit of what it is. So I'm not going to do slides today. I'm just going to talk. I have slides. You can watch them. It's like 2 slides. But the idea is I want to work on lowering the barrier to entry for newcomers. So a lot of people, including myself, I can say, let's say Carlos 4 years ago didn't know anything about Kubernetes, know a little bit about containers, but that's it. So I think there's a lot of people these days with that at that level that they feel intimidated when they try to learn these new tools or components that they have to like install a big cluster, or they don't try it out because they think it will take them a week to install, or it will take them days to configure, or if they mess up a cluster. So what I tried to do was create something very simple that is super easy to install, so people can actually see somebody else doing it. So because a lot of times we see demos and we just see like, oh, I installed this software, let's move on, let's explain the software. But a lot of people get stuck. You leave a lot of people behind, like, well, how do I install it in my laptop? How do I delete it? How much do I need? So that's what I'm going to go over, and maybe this is a good recording for folks watching the recording. So as a message to those that are watching, if you're not live in the meetup, we cut the jokes and the bloopers, so you're missing, so attend the next one. This is try to do a markdown. You can, with Kubernetes, this is going to Kubernetes. You don't have to be an expert in Kubernetes or YAML for this. So you can pick, I have 3, I have Katacoda. You can go into Katacoda and just run something. And I don't know why this is not opening. Let me move this out of the way. You can get a free cluster in IBM. It's very small. It's like 2 gigs for CPU, but and then I'm going to do the Minikube. Also, you can use Kind if you want to do Kind. But so what I did, I'm trying to see also, for example, for demo purposes and for educational purposes, when I give a class, what is the minimum amount of resources that you need on your laptop to run these type of things that you just want to learn. So for this example, I'm going to use just Serving and Tecton. So 2 CPUs and 2 gigs is good enough. So if you have a laptop that can do that, that's okay. I already did, so I already have like a Kubernetes cluster running with the minimum thing that I did, and I just literally did this before starting. Next thing is you have to have a few CLIs. So these CLIs basically give you an abstraction to do imperative programming or setup of these tools. But at the same time, take into account that this is also can be done in a declarative way. For example, configuration as code, aka YAML. And then you will need a container registry. I'm using Docker registry. So this, if it's not apparent, these whole tools evolve around containers. So I'm going to use Docker because that's a common one, but you can use any registry out there. And set up Git, just git clone this repo. So let's get started with installing Tecton. So a lot of people ask like how difficult to install Tecton. There's an operator, but I'm going to just install the YAML, and then you run these commands. Basically, this install the CRDs and install a couple of pods. They don't consume a lot of CPU, and it should not take that long to install. So we have good documentation in the Knative site, but sometimes I do this so I can tell folks, hey, go here, and this is just one instance of getting something working, right? It's not the only way. So that took 27 seconds. So also to showcase some of the improvement that people have done around the project of the installing experience. The next thing that we need is Courier. Courier is the networking part that Knative configures. So back in the days was only Istio. So these days is a plugin architecture. So we have Courier, Istio, Contour, Glue. So all of them are in the documentation. I'm using Courier because it's tiny and it was easy to get it up. All of them, I guess, they're easy, but this is, like I said, one example. I'm going to be using no ports. That's very simple. Again, this tutorial was to make it very easy for folks to get started. So current setup, I'm going to get some of the environment variables. Let me put this here. Maria, can you see my screen okay, or should I make it bigger? A little bit bigger.
I think it's good, yeah.
I don't want this to be tiny. So I'm going to source some environment variables. They're in the GitHub repo. So I created a namespace because sometimes you get given a cluster and you're given a namespace. So you can play in that namespace. So in this case, mine is called demo. I'm using the nip.io. So I already did this. One thing that we have to do is patch, tell Kubernetes about this domain name. I can patch it. The next thing is for Courier to work in this environment, I need to access some port 80. So I'm going to create another service that gives me a no port on that external IP, and I'll be able to access that. Then we have to tell Knative about are you going to use Istio, are you going to use Glue. So in this case, we're going to say, please, Knative, when you want to configure the networking, go ahead and create ingress resources for Courier to pick up. And that's it. That's the stuff I also wanted to show to users, that even if you're watching, it just took me like 5 minutes to have Knative install. Since this was about Tecton, I also snuck in for Knative, but some people don't know what Knative is, or they haven't seen a demo, or they cannot run a demo. So what I did was created a kind of like Knative quick demo to showcase some of the features. So for example, I like to use the CLI for when I'm like hacking things. So the CLI got updated to .16. We were just talking about .16. So all this is running the latest version of Knative. So I can create a Knative service with just a container. I can give it a window of like how fast do you want to scale down. But the CLI give you like a quick way to get started from a container to a URL, for example. So in the second part, we're going to see Tecton, how we can get source code into a container. Because so that's the second question that everybody asks is like, how do I get my code into a container so then Knative can use it? So since this is a brand new cluster, I just did a minikube delete. It doesn't have the image cache. So that's why it takes a little bit of time the first time. And I think that, let me see if it worked. So if I do this, I see that it says that it's ready. and I get a URL. So if I went from a container registry, having a container to a URL, basically, I don't know if people are timing me, maybe I'm talking too much. And this will be faster if you try it yourself. But we can just hit it, right? Open that domain name and it says hello world. So let me do it again to make this bigger. And that's kind of like the aspect of it. But the things that is the thing about Knative is on the background, there's a pod running. And when I'm not hitting it, it's terminating. So I just use a flag to make it faster for the demo, but the pod is gone. We don't have any pods. There's no instance. So it's still terminating. At that point, Knative told Kubernetes, go ahead, delete this pod. And it should be gone in a few seconds, but it's not going to consume time. So that's what some people call serverless, right? The serverless aspect of Knative. And that's kind of like the quick demo if you don't have a lot of time. Just to watch a quick demo, I got Knative installed. So I don't know if I'm going to have a lot of time here, but I also want to show another nifty thing that what was playing with the CLI, I was able to figure out was, what about if I want to update something about that service? So for example, an environment variable. I can do it with the CLI, right? I can say update that service, and now I have a new revision. Let's call it V1. I'm calling this one V1. And now if I call it the app, now I'm calling my new revision of that service. So now it says hello V1. And that's okay. But what about if we want to do traffic splitting? I'm not using Istio, by the way. I'm using Cur, so you can get this just with the Cur gateway. So I'm going to update the service now, and I'm going to create a revision saying, I want to create a new revision and send maybe not the whole traffic, but 25% of the traffic, and leave the rest of the traffic to the old V1. So that way I'm able to do traffic splitting in other tools. So this is an abstraction. So if we describe it, you will see, I'm also doing a demo of the CLI. You will see that the information about the revision, you will see the 75 and the 25 split and the URL. So if I call it the URL, let's say in a loop, you will see that most of the requests are going to be going into V1, and then V2 will get a few. So this is a common practice when you're rolling out new software, that you roll out small percentage of the traffic to that new one. If it looks good, then you move forward. So as you can see, V1 is getting more traffic. But what about if we want to do something even like beyond that? Let's say that I have a new version of my application. I'm going to configure something, but I don't want anyone to see it by default. So let's say that I run this command, and this what it's going to do is leave the 75%, 25% to V2, and then the latest will get 0%. And you will ask, like, well, if it gets 0%, how do I access this app? So this is what is called Canary Deployment or dark launch. I still don't want everybody to get it, but I'm going to be able to get it in a second. So if we describe it, so describe is common command, even in Kubernetes, to describe a resource. So in this case, you see 0 to the latest, 25 and 25 to V2, 75 to V1. So we call it, so it's not available. It's getting 0%, but because I'm using tags, one cool thing that is happening is Knative is giving me a domain name that has the V3 tag in there. So I can access that revision, but my users will not access that revision. So I can go ahead in a loop and then still V1 and V2. And if I'm happy with it, after testing it, or maybe I get testers or I test it myself, I can update with the CLI and say, make the latest revision 100%. So that way I can access it and I can see 100% of it. So now I can go to the app, and instead of seeing V1 and V2, I only see V3, that is the latest one. And again, this is the flexibility of Knative, and this is like one of the reasons people ask, like, if I'm using Kubernetes, what are the things that Knative is going to bring? So you see some of the abstraction and the fast way I can get this working. I can also do something like this, right? I can say, oh, there was a problem with V3. I think we should go to V1. I can say, well, V1 now gets the traffic. So all the revisions are live in the cluster. They live in the cluster. So I can run the loop again, and we're both rolling back. So this is what we call like rolling back to a version that was working. So with that, the thing is, this is what I said is, if I now, because I'm using tagging, which is very cool, I can access any of the versions, and basically it's going to bring up the pods on demand, serverless, and they're available V1, V2, and V3. But in this case, one of them is latest, but they're always available, and you can roll back, you can roll forward, and you can manage that. In other software scenarios, gets very complex. So this is what I think the community here in Knative is doing to address. So some folks are not familiar with it. It's hard to comprehend between all the noise of what you get there. So, and that's it. So this is, I just did the demo with the CLI, but there's YAML behind it. So you can, everything that I did, you can declare the YAML in Kubernetes API resources. So I can declare a V1, a V2, and V3, and I can declare my split of percentages, my traffic there. So this is a very small version of the YAML. If you were going to do it with like raw Kubernetes or other tools, it will be a lot of configuration. So that's what Knative is giving you. So that's the idea, and you can deploy the YAML. I'm going to do it here, and then you're back to it. So you can do it declarative and imperative. So at that point, I'm going to just ask maybe 1 minute for feedback. This is something I wanted to show also here in the community to see. Sometimes we're asked to demo Knative, and I was looking for like what would be the fastest way that I can like get somebody interested or just understand what the project is, and a fast way to do it. So any questions, any feedback, A&A before continuing? Or nobody's listening? Or there's chats.
I was gonna say it's a very nice, clear demo.
Okay. Yeah, and I think here in the meetup, everybody's from Knative, so this is like what you do every day. But at least this is recorded, so if somebody asks you for a demo or like something, now you don't have to do it, then it's done.
I really like that you focused on the CLI. It gives a different perspective for everybody who's in the Kubernetes ecosystem, that for users who are not familiar with actually Kubernetes, there is a CLI that you can use. And I really like this entry as opposed to go YAML first.
Yeah, that was the idea, to start with the CLI, but also show that there's declarative way behind it, right? And also I didn't want to show all features of Knative because then will be becoming a long demo, and I didn't have that much time, which I don't have here, but I'll move to Tecton next. Go ahead, Evan.
Oh, I was just going to say, the CLI is great for demoing and experimenting. And then when you move to production, people generally, that's when people want to have things in YAML so they can code review what's going on.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think there's a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's the same paradigm that I do even for kubectl. I do things imperative with kubectl, run --rm, and then once I know what is working, I save it to Git as declarative code. Go ahead, Maria.
There was a question on the chat, I think from Alex. Any plans to add Knative eventing to tutorial and use Knative client?
Yes. So I didn't do it, one, because it will make, this was focused for that presentation. So I didn't want to add eventing. Also Knative CLI. I want to highlight the same thing with the Knative CLI. So I think the recent release has the things that I wanted to show with the CLI and then show the YAML. So yeah, I can add that, and also looking into the resources. If I add Knative eventing, I think the dispatcher is asked for one more CPU, so I would need like 3 CPUs instead of 2 CPUs. That's something I also want to go back to the community to have a demo version or just have one command that patches the request. But I would need more CPU. And the free cluster that I get in IKS is in IBM is 2 CPUs. So yeah, the short answer is yes. I'm going to give like some similar hello world of Knative eventing there.
I think the in-memory controller dropped the requests and limits last release or the release before. So hopefully it's a smaller footprint.
Yeah. And this is for demo purposes, right? Take into account I want to run this like even in a Raspberry Pi or vegan thing. So let's move to Tecton. I think even like during the beginning of the meetup, I was asking about Tecton. So how the same concept of Tecton, like how difficult it is. It takes a week, it takes 1 day to install Tecton. Do I need to buy a cluster? Do I need to like put a credit card? No, it's the same thing. You can start very simple, installing the same way I did with Knative. So let's install Tecton. I'm still using my 2 CPUs, right? I haven't done my budget for my 2 CPUs and my 2 gigs of memory. So I have worked with folks that don't have computers that have a lot of memory. So even to try things is a barrier to entry. So that's why I want to do the demos with the mono memory. So for Tecton, you have to install the Tecton pipelines. The Tecton, this in GitHub. They have a project called Pipelines. So you install that one. It gives you a webhook and a controller. Also, there's a dashboard that is, I make it optional because sometimes I just use the CLI. I don't use the UI. Also, sometimes I use OpenShift, and OpenShift has their own UI. But the dashboard is kind of nice to have it. So let's put it in there, and it also fits, doesn't consume that much memory. To access this UI, I usually use it not for like configuring things, but just to watch what's available. Same thing people some do with the Kubernetes dashboard. So the dashboard is there. So let me create a service that exposes the node port so I can access it. That way I can get a URL and I can open this URL and say, it's a way to like see what is the pipeline, what are the tasks are running, task run. So I usually do task run or pipeline run. So I got Tecton installed. So sometimes we spend, because that's our work as platform people or tool people, we spend a lot of time working the install process and talking about the install process. And some users really like, I don't care, I just need to install it, right? It should work. So that's kind of the net of it. You install it and you move out of the way. I already have the Tecton CLI's TKN. And let's verify if it's working. This is kind of a step I put in there to see if everything's working. So my pods are working, I have the dashboard, I have pipelines, and I have the service. So in terms of people ask like, which CI/CD pipeline do I use for Knative? Well, Knative is, for the most part, runs on Kubernetes. You have to build a container. So any tool, CI/CD tool that allows you to take source code and convert that source code into a container, it works with Knative. So let's hold on for the second part on how to deploy the application forward. So building, for the credentials, I'm going to create the idea is I'm going to take some source code and push it into the container registry. In this case, it could be Quail, Docker registry, Google registry, Amazon registry, your own private registry, IBM registry, anyone of them. It doesn't matter. Because Tecton, what it's doing is taking the source code and converting that into an archive, a container registry, and then pushing it there. So I already have the secret created. I just put my username and password for Docker Hub. So I have the secret there. The steps are here. You can run it, and it'll give you the thing. And then Tecton needs a service account because it would run these pipelines or tasks, these CI/CD jobs, with a service account. So we have to create one and associate it with this secret. So because it's going to be the one that is going to deploy. And then this step is to configure the RBAC because later we're going to use Tecton to deploy, basically do kubectl. So it needs access to a Kubernetes resource. I give it permission to say, hey, you can create a Knative resource, basically to deploy. So I'm going to create that. That's just an RBAC. I created a resource a role base. So that way, if people only have access to one namespace or one project in terms of OpenShift, they don't need cluster roles. So that's another misconception, that you need a cluster admin. For certain things, you can just do it in a namespace or project. So the building Tecton task. So a task is in Tecton, it will take our source code that it lives in, let's say in this GitHub repo. I happen to put both the source code and the pipelines in the same repo. As best practice, you will separate those, but for demo purposes, this is a Node.js app, but in case I put a folder called Node.js, you can change this GitHub repo and put here Go, Java, Python, any language you want. So basically, it's going to take this source code and convert it into an image. In this case, there's no imperative way of creating these tasks, because at the end of the day, with Tecton, basically you are writing a bunch of scripts and running them in sequence. So in Tecton, what we call that is a task. You're going to create a task. This task takes parameters, like your input parameters. One thing to take into account, the latest versions of Tecton, they deprecated the pipeline resources, like the image or the Git. So everything now is simpler. It just use parameters for everything, the image URL, the Git URL, the revision, and everything. So this task does two things. It will do a Git clone of the GitHub repo, and then put that in a volume mount that is empty directory, is sharing the same thing, and then run an utility. So this utility could be a binary like Canico or Builda, or something that will take source code and convert to image, like source to image or S2I. But that's, to some developers, that it's not even important. I have code in a folder. You can even use buildpack, right, to detect what type of language you have. At the end of the day, it will give you back a container. So to deploy it, that's where you will need kubectl. So you will run kubectl and deploy the task. After that, then you can use the Tecton CLI to list the task. So let me put this on the top. So I'm listing the task. Also describe the build, my task. So you can describe the build, and it will tell you what are the input parameters. So I need the GitHub URL, and then where do I going to send that image? But I'm going to pass that as a parameter with the Tecton CLI. So with the Tecton CLI, I can start a task run or an instance of this task, and I'm going to pass the repo URL and basically convert a URL to an image. And this is kind of the concept that we had back in the days in Knative. When Knative started, it had a component called Knative build, which basically what you were able to configure declarative, the source code URL, and then it will convert that into an image. But that project, I guess, matured and the broader scope, and then that got converted into Tecton. So if I start this with this command line, and I'm specifying the folder, which is Node.js, and the service account, which is pipeline. And this will start a pod. At the end of the day, this is running pods. It's kind of like serverless also. Serverless CI/CD. It will launch a pod, run these two containers for the Git clone, and then converting the image and pushing the image. And then the pod will complete, and it will stay there, not consuming any memory or CPU. So as you can see, it already did so I'm envy with them because they have colors, and a Knative CLI doesn't have colors. So that's just something that I wish we had in Knative, and I think that's also possible to add, not a problem. But so it's doing the first task, which is the Git clone, and the second one is the one that takes more time, and you can optimize this with better way of managing your Docker files or the tool that you're using, or caching into a volume and such. But for this demo, I don't think it takes more than a minute to build. So I think that's okay to wait a minute. So basically already did the Docker build. So now it's pushing to my container registry. So it's pushing to docker.io, this namespace, and this that. So this is when people ask about CI/CD, is finding a tool or finding a DevOps CI/CD pipeline that will convert a URL, take source from a URL, convert into an image, and then push it. So it got done in 1 minute and 29 seconds. I can double check if the image is there with a curl, just if we want to do it, or just go to Docker Hub. I'm going to go over that. So that's it. You're done with the build. So this is the part of Tecton that is you're writing scripts and you run them in sequence, and this is one task and it's reusable. So that's a reusable part of Tecton. The second part is, how do I deploy now this image? I can go back to do a KN service create, or I can maybe use something like Flux or Argo. Those are declarative things that would do a GitOps approach, or you can also run like a script using Tecton. So in this case, I have a Tecton task that basically takes a GitHub URL that I have the YAML that points to this image, that is going to point to this image. And basically it's going to do the same thing, to a task with two steps. The first one does the git clone of the source code that have my YAML. One of the inputs is the directory where the YAML is, the YAML file name. And basically does the kubectl apply. So this is why I did the RBAC. So if you specify an image, then I'm going to replace the image in the service.yaml with the new image, because that's part of the demo. The purpose is every time you do a commit to the Git repository, I want another immutable image with a tag associated to the Git commit. So let's deploy the deploy task. Again, kubectl apply. So I now should have two tasks. I should have a build and a deploy task. So I have the build and deploy, and I can just describe the deploy, again, showcasing the Tecton CLI. They put the parameters here. You see the steps that it takes, and it has a, I didn't notice it has a feed put there. And any task I run, I haven't run a task run yet. So this is the YAML that we're going to deploy. So basically, you put anything that you want in those scripts. There's just bash scripts, kubectl apply. So this is the YAML that is the Knative service. So you see service, but it's under Knative. So this is a Knative service, much shorter, and it will have an image, and it has our environment variable. So if we start this, it should start another pod, ephemeral, and passing the directory where my Knative is and my service. So I think I had a link here to that. I can even show that here. And you can have one YAML, multiple YAML files. So this is the one that I'm deploying. So I'm deploying this. It happens to be in the same repository. As I said, best practice is to have it separate. But yes, it took 13 seconds. So how fast does it take to deploy with Tecton or deploy Knative? Is just launching a pod, running a kubectl command. And these steps I didn't mention are running in containers. So you decide the container that you want to use. So it should have the utility. So in this case, I'm using one that I created with kubectl and JQ. And you can use it, it's open source, and it's out there. Let me go back if this little window allow me to move here. So I have my two tasks, and my Knative demo app is deployed. So I basically did one task to create the image, one task to deploy, and I should be able to, again, call my new app, and it says, welcome to Knative Meetup, which I updated that a few minutes ago into the YAML. And to finish, I'm going to talk about pipelines. So pipelines is, how do I put two tasks together to work in to be executed in parallel or be executed in serially? So yeah, you declare this as a YAML file. So you declare a pipeline that is going to take some input parameters, for example, the GitHub URL, the image that you're going to send it, maybe the image tag. Now it's important because every time I want to do a Git commit, I want a new image tag with that Git hash or the seven first characters. And I'm going to specify the two tasks. The first task is the build that we just saw, and the second one is the deploy. And basically it's going to run them sequentially. You can stitch them by results or just saying run after build. So I did run after build, and then you deploy the pipeline. So this is where most of the real projects happen. Doing pipelines, the tasks are like composable things. So it's a composable framework. I can use the CLI to list it or describe it. So this is a build and deploy. So it's describing it, the input parameters, it lists the tasks that it's doing, and then what are the things that it ran. If I want to run it from the pipe, from the CLI, I can also do it imperative. I can run it. Basically, I'm passing the image URL where I want to deploy, and the repo URL, which is my repo, and it's going to run the two tasks instead of I did it manually before. It's going to run one after the other using the same image. And then again, it will take a minute to do that, and then we'll be able to see our Knative application. And then lastly is the automation, because it gets tired by running this thing manually. Every time you push something to Git or you submit a PR, that's where like another component, I guess the third component of Tecton is Tecton Triggers. Tecton Triggers basically helps you create kind of like a little pod that can receive the Git webhooks, and it could be GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub, basically anything that would trigger this pipeline. So if you install it, let's see if that's finished. I'm going to skip because I'm taking a lot of time over my budget. So let's give it a time for this to finish, and I will talk a little bit more about the triggers. So triggers is a way that you can bind when you receive a Git request. You have a template. So the template is what are the things that you want to create resources. So it's done. So it took a minute and a half. So now is updated, and I was able to create the pipeline. So let me install the Tecton Triggers. If you install the Tecton Triggers, this is a separate component, so you can decide if you want it or not. So if you need trigger the pipelines with a URL endpoint, then you can do that. So that's the Tecton Triggers, and basically what you need is a trigger template that says when GitHub, it's a Git event happens, I want you to create these resources. So I want you to like run a pipeline with these input parameters. In this case, I'm passing the revision in case of will be the revision, the URL, and then the tag, which is the first truncated chasm. So this is a nice thing that Tecton has. So I'm going to replace it because I want to say what is the image that I wanted to use. And then it has a binding, and that's the second component. Is like when I receive a GitHub webhook, how do I extract things from the HTTP body of that Git webhook? So I can get the commit ID. In this case, this is a format for GitHub, the URL, but also it has an extension that I can going to show of how can I use Tecton to tell it, hey, run some logic in their declarative. So let's do the binding. So this is what is called Tecton binding. And then the event trigger, this is basically putting that pod in place. Here's the YAML. Again, there's a lot of YAML. But basically what you're saying is I want a service or a pod to spin up. It's going to process GitHub events, in this case, push, or I can say which ones I want with a cell, which is this is a way of declarative way of doing some logic in here, and that is coming from master. So I can scope it to push and master. I can also take the git commit and just truncate it to the 7 characters. So that would be my image tag. So every time there's a GitHub git commit happens, I want a new image with a new GitHub the git commit hash, but only the 7 characters, because if it's long, it's annoying. So I'm going to create this, and this will spin up a pod configure with this configuration that is going to put the two things together, the binding and the template. If we double check, this is up and running, so it's a little pod, doesn't consume that much resources. You can have one per repo. You can configure it in multiple places, and then you can configure GitHub. So in this case, I'm going to expose it to a node port so I can access it. And then I'm going to get the GitHub URL. Like if GitHub can access my laptop, it will work. But you can use a Kubernetes cluster, free or paid, that is on the cloud. Or you can use inlets. I point out inlets is something that you can like get traffic from the internet into your laptop. So I'm not going to show how to add this in here because I already did it, but you can test it with curl. So you can like emulate that GitHub event. So I can like, it's a push. So I just triggered the pipeline and it's running, and actually I can even see it in the Tecton here when it's running. Let me see, this one is, I think it's this one. This one is in IKEA, so it's running in the UI. So that's triggered in that. I can also show where I already did it in the GitHub URL. So if you're doing this lab, basically follow the instructions and go into settings, and you click webhooks, and you can do this programmatically also. I added one to a free Kubernetes cluster that I have online in IBM. So I have a second like environment like this because I wanted to test online. So basically you just edit this and put the GitHub URL either using inlets to your Mac or your Kubernetes cluster. And every time something happens in Git, I can change something that will start a new change. So I can go ahead and change something about the application. So I can say something like changing the code. So now it becomes, I only focus on my source code, my Java, Python, Go code. And I can put here, thanks for watching the demo video, right? And this would trigger, I'm going to just commit the master like YOLO, right? And this would trigger the pipeline. In this case, I'm pointing to my other cluster. So it started building my container, is going to deploy the app in that namespace, and then my new app should be available in 1 minute. So I can do this for PRs and to a separate namespace, or when I merge to master to deploy to staging or production. So I hope this demo is useful for folks getting started into this space, that it feels a little bit intimidated, right? That you need a lot of resources or a powerful computer or a wallet. It's super easy to get started and follow along. So I think I'm over my 30 minutes, Maria.
Yes. Yeah, but thank you so much for
Any
offering
questions
this demo.
in the chat? Or
well, the chat, there were several questions and people were responding